So it looks like the Tyranids are back in a very big way in Warhammer 40k 10th edition, a whole ton of new plastic kits shortly to be unveiled for the faction, and Games Workshop have been kind enough to show off a whole bunch of those in the animated trailer. As with last time in 9th edition, every time we saw a new model in the animated trailer, it wound up becoming a plastic kit in a short amount of time, and I strongly suspect that the contents of this trailer will be almost identical to the launch box that we'll hopefully be getting fairly soon with Space Marines vs Tyranids. In this video we're going to take a look at the forces of the Great Devourer and talk about every new unit that we can see in the trailer. First up, and making a fairly big entry, is the Screamer Killer Carnifex, perhaps best seen in this one where he's meeting his unfortunate end due to a las cannon blast. In the trailer, the Screamer Killer just absolutely tears through an entire squad of Space Marines, smashing some apart with its massive talons, using its bioplasmic scream to roast one guy, and really showcasing just how big and strong it is as it tears through the squad until it gets taken out by a shooty dreadnought. Out of the units in the trailer, this was perhaps one of the easiest to identify, I think. Games Workshop really do like to resurrect their old concepts from Warhammer 40k and try and update them with modern sensibilities. This one is basically trying to remake this old classic miniature on the bottom right here. You can see that the claws are held in the same sort of pose, though thankfully they've heavily modified and modernised the design. In the lore, these guys blast people with screams of bioplasma from their maws, which is how you can identify that it's one of these. It does feel like a Carnifex equivalent. The standard Space Marine weapons do little to nothing to it, and it's only brought down by focused fire. A bit of a heavy hitter there. I think it is kind of interesting that this one, which often makes it into top 10 lists of 40k's most ugly models, has been redone. I do think that as retro models go, it's one that maybe hasn't aged particularly well, definitely harkens back to a previous age of wargaming. Currently, the Screamer Killer is an option in the Tyranid Codex right now. It's just literally a wargear option for the standard Carnifex. You can see it on this guy here with the four-siding talons plus the screamy maw. I'd guess that seeing as this one does look a fair bit different to the standard Carnifex, that the two designs will diverge a bit. I think that we'll get the Screamer Killer as a different model to the standard Carnifex, maybe being in a similar sort of weight class but might be a bit redesigned. And then in the Tyranid roster we'll probably have the Screamer Killer as one unit selection and the main Carnifex as a different one. In the rules I'd expect something pretty similar to how he is now, to be honest. A melee powerhouse with a decent close range shooting attack that's quite good against heavy infantry. Next up out of the 8 is our trusty friends the Tyranid Termagants. The backbone of the Tyranid hordes can be seen scuttling through the woods here, and these are the ones that Games Workshop have actually shown us off the full model for, giving us a nice 360 shot of the model. Really quite nicely redone from the classic one, I think, definitely an upgrade. From the actual cinematic, we can't really learn all that much more, to be honest. We only really see them with flesh borers. I do quite like the way that they run though, they kind of have a dinosaur raptor-like feel, which maybe just feels a little bit more obvious on them now that the new ones are a bit more bipedal, standing on two legs. I have done an entire video talking about their new model and new rules. The fact that the datasheet still includes things like Spine Fists and Devourers implies that they're probably not going to be going away in 10th, so at least one of the kits should probably have those as an option, whether or not it's the starter box one or a later release. Overall, I think it's a pretty fitting update. The old ones had some really bad mold line issues going on, and were just from a simpler era of miniatures where you couldn't get quite so much detail. The new ones just seem a lot more alive and in motion than the old ones, perhaps. One thing to note is that the base does look a little bit bigger. It looks like they're based on 28mm ones, maybe not the most helpful thing in the world compared with the old ones. Next up, and looming right out of the darkness, are the Tyranid Lictors, the spooky Tyranids with the chameleon skin that lurch out of the darkness, often a vanguard organism of the swarm lying in wait for a long time to burst forth when the invasion starts in earnest. I feel like this was really quite an interesting little scene in the trailer, the apothecary working late at night. When out of the darkness, he's grabbed by the clawed talons of a Lictor, and though he survives the initial ambush, it's soon revealed that there's plenty more all around him, and he's definitely not going to make it out of this. The Lictors do seem to actually make an appearance slightly later in the trailer as well. I will take a look at that in just a second. From this scene though, they do seem very likely to be Lictors. They burst out of the shadows, exactly what they like to do, and you can see the same sort of style of claws that they have on this one when the apothecary cuts through one of them. If you had to predict Tyranid models that they'd update in a big plastic update, then I think that the Lictors will be well up there. Games Workshop are trying to replace as much of their old resin range as they possibly can. These guys do stick out a bit. Changing from a single fine cast miniature with just one main pose to a multi-part plastic kit will be pretty excellent. Hopefully they might give us a unit of multiple in the same squad. Talking of second shots though, I do believe that we see the Lictors again in the trailer. On my first watch through, I thought that this might be an equivalent of a Tyranid warrior or something, but it does actually look like they're the same unit, just revealed in the light of battle. Actually taking a look at the different body parts compared with our standard Lictor kit one by one, it does seem to have the same tentacled maw. The talons do seem to be in a very similar style with those double joints and things, and you can even see its prehensile barbed tail with the spiky bit on the back. The bit that seems to have changed for the Lictors is the spiky bit on the front of their head, but that does seem to be identical to the ones who grabbed the apothecary earlier, so I would say that it's likely that they're the same unit. Next up, from stealth organisms to heavy bombardment, we have the Tyranid Biovores. These guys are the living artillery that rain down spore mine death on their foes. In the trailer, they unleash a heavy bombardment of some living ammunition, and these ones make short work of that new ranged dreadnought who gets taken down by these plus a bunch of Hormagaunts. Again, these ones do feel really quite a specific unit. They're only in the trailer for a second or two, but you can see the same sort of head that this one's got. They appear to be all hunched over and low to the floor, and you can see their oversized carapace-like gun firing the artillery projectiles. Some of the tubing and piping type things that connect the Tyranids to the weapon beast thing look kind of the same. I do quite like the way that with the Tyranid weapons they often have a little eye on them to denote them as weapon beasts. Technically the guns are a different organism to the main beastie. Model-wise, this one falls into a very similar logical update to the Tyranid Lictor. Currently, you can only get one Finecast one plus a few Spore Mines for £30 or $50. It is generally considered one of the worst value Games Workshop kits that they produce, particularly as you'd often want a unit of these, not just one. I really hope when they remake the kit, they make it a dual kit for the Biovore and the Pyrovore. The Pyrovore's kind of similar, but you just trade out the mine launcher for a big flamethrower on the top. Seems like that could be a really clear win, as they're very similar otherwise, though I do wonder how likely that really is if they are going to be in a launch box, which also seems likely, and those tend to be pretty monopose. If they follow the pattern of the current one though, they might come with some spore mines to spawn. It definitely seems possible you might get a few of those in their kit as well. Speaking of Hormagaunts though, here we have the melee swarms of the Tyranids, a whole host of melee bugs charging out of the darkness, and you can see a few of them do their signature move, the bounding leap, jumping some unexpectedly long distances to close with their foe when they get near. We get a bit of a better look at these ones than we do the Termagants for the most part. As with those, the appearances look kinda similar to be honest. If anything, maybe the secondary claws look a little bit smaller than they were, but otherwise a kinda similar model armed with its two scything talons. Again, like the Termagants, I can see why they redid these. It's another one of their kits that actually needed an update far more than most, I think. The appearance of the model I don't actually think is too bad and it holds up really quite nicely, but I think Games Workshop had a bit of an issue with the balancing of these things. If you are trying to field a horde of them in game, then they just fall over a lot. It's enough of a problem already that those claws and things like to get hooked on each other, never mind overbalancing. Again, I'd guess that if they're redoing the base size on the Termagants, they'll probably do the same for these. Seems likely to be a 28mm one, they do have quite a lot of overhang. Moving on though, now we seem to be getting beyond the realms of Tyranids that are obviously identifiable. A pair of Tyranid creatures that seem to be eating a couple of space marines with a whole bunch of tentacles around their maw. Lore-wise, they might possibly fit in with something like the Tyranid Malanthrope, though to me they look a little bit different to that. The pair of them seem to be doing a little bit of battlefield cleanup, eating some space marines when they're rudely disturbed by an assault cannon. Unless it could be a bit of a reinterpretation of the Forge World Malanthrope, these guys don't look enormously similar to most Tyranid organisms to me. They appear to be a small support monster, maybe not the most direct combatants, but they've got a maw big enough to eat entire space marines at once, and they don't seem to be too fussy about taking them out of their armour first. In this cinematic, there's clearly two of them pictured. I think it's not unreasonable that there could be two of them in a box that they come with, either the launch box or a subsequent plastic kit. They sort of have a kind of feel of them within the army like the Necron Canoptic Reanimator does. Not really big damage dealers or receivers that want to be on the front lines, but they might be able to do something to support the Tyranid army as it moves up, perhaps doing something like healing them from nearby kills or something. In terms of new Tyranid monsters, we have also seen this guy in the artwork from Games Workshop's newsletter. They do look like there are some similarities between them, a great big tentacled maw and a medium-sized monster perhaps, but this one maybe does look a little bit different, looks a bit more crab or spider-like, plus you can't obviously see its head. Could be a different interpretation, or just a different monster altogether. I'd say out of the entire trailer, perhaps one of the Tyranids that made the single biggest impression would be this Winged Prime or Shrike. This guy's here to spoil the fun of the Terminator with the assault cannon, jumping into the fray, taking a whole bunch of minigun rounds to the chest, and then proceeding to tear even tactical dreadnought armor in half. This guy definitely makes an impression, and from the cinematic we can see that he's a fair bit bigger than the Terminator, but not by all that much. He's perhaps a bit more spindly, he feels something more Broodlord size as opposed to full-on monster, though definitely bigger than most infantry. He's armed with a set of twinned claws and seems to have hoofed feet, and some great big wings to get him around the battlefield quickly. I did see a lot of people mentioning that this might be a Tyranid hive tyrant, but it really doesn't look like it, to be honest. It's far smaller than a hive tyrant would be compared with the Terminators, even the new bigger flavour. The posing of it is also kind of completely different as well, a lot more similar to something like a Tyranid warrior. The feet also end in hooves as opposed to the Flyrant's clawed talons, and the wings are mounted a fair bit differently as well, more sort of coming off the back. We do only see one of him though, which does to me imply that he's probably a Tyranid character, as we haven't really seen all that many other choices that could be leaders for a launch box. For his size and weight class equivalent, I sort of feel like he seems similar to a Tyranid Prime, currently the HQ choice for warriors that you can only build out of the standard warrior box set. It would be kind of nice to have an actual dedicated plastic kit to that miniature, and having one that could build a winged one or a walking one would be kind of cool. Might not necessarily be a prime though, might be just completely his own thing. He does look like he's somewhat related to warriors though. The other possibility is that he could be a Tyranid Shrike. These are a bit of a relic from the past, Tyranid warriors with wings that Forge World used to sell an upgrade kit for. They do look pretty similar to this guy, to be honest. It could be that he's just one out of a squad, and maybe he might have some other winged bodies to back him up. Given that a massive Tyranid release is coming though, and we're going to get a bunch of things that aren't just in this launch box teaser trailer, I really think there's a pretty reasonable possibility that we get both winged warriors and also a winged HQ to lead them. Let me know what you make of this guy though. Is he a Shrike or an HQ choice? Finally, and appearing towards the end of the video, is a big bad psychic bog. He's here alongside his two little attendants, ready to bring down the full might of the hive mind and the shadow in the warp on their foes. This guy's a bit of an ominous one, borne aloft with psychic energies on its floating tentacles. He makes pretty short work of a space marine librarian, effortlessly besting him with his psychic might. He's perhaps not quite as easy to judge the size of from the trailer, but he looks like he's quite a big bog, to be honest. He definitely has the same sort of look and feel about him to the Zoanthropes and the Neurothrope. They're all kind of medium-sized Tyranids, whereas this guy is a really big one, but has two little mini ones nearby to help him out, I suppose. Like the Zoanthropes and the Neurothropes, he seems to have an exposed brain for doing all that psychic, and he looks like he's got a Tyranid crown of spikes around it. I believe that they have had a relic called a Norn crown for quite a while now. If I had to guess, I'd tentatively put this down as a new Tyranid psychic monster HQ choice. It feels like a bit more of a central unit in the army, and we do already have a non-HQ Psyker in the Maliceptor, so perhaps seems a little bit less likely to be in that role perhaps. For miniatures, I feel like this one's going to work very similar to things like the Tau Ghostkill or Riptide, a main big monster with two little attendants floating alongside. They'll probably amp up his psychic abilities while they live, and they might be able to tank a big damage hit or two for him before they go down. Another possibility that I've seen a few people talking about is whether or not this one could represent the Doom of Malantine. This guy was a Tyranid creature back from a previous edition of the Codex. Alongside the Parasite and Mortrex, it was a unit that had rules but no model. A psychic leech Tyranid that stowed itself away aboard an Eldar craft world and then fed itself on all psychic energy, becoming near invincible. Certainly seems that they could reinterpret that in a new and different way like this, though at the same time I wonder if he's just being represented by standard Neurothropes that we already have, the Tyranid Psychic HQ that you can build out of the Zoanthrope units. It's definitely very plausible that they could redo the Doom of Malantine though, as we got the surprise new model release for the Parasite and Mortrex in the Tyranid Codex last time round. So anyway, that just about brings us to the end of looking at 8 new Tyranid units seen in the 10th edition launch trailer. There's going to be a whole ton of new bugs coming, it would seem. Hopefully Games Workshop will be showing us off a few more models of these in the coming weeks. I'll certainly be looking forward to covering it here on the channel when they do. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day. There'll be plenty to talk about with 10th edition, I'm sure. Otherwise, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked down in the video description below. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with the chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, an absolutely massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.